Sometimes the hardest choices we face come when we have no choices left at all. When everything you've ever loved is gone and winter is closing in, even pride becomes a luxury you can't afford. Sarah Mitchell stands at the door of a stranger's cabin in the Colorado wilderness, a widow with nothing but the clothes on her back. Jack Dawson, the mountain man inside, sees the desperation in her eyes. She asks for work. He offers marriage instead before sunset. It's not about love. It's about survival in a land that shows no mercy to those who face it alone. Can two broken people build something real from the ashes of their past? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 weeks earlier, Sarah Mitchell had stood in a different doorway, watching men carry her husband's body down from the mountain. Thomas had left that morning with the other miners, his lunch pail in hand and a kiss on her cheek. He came back on a makeshift stretcher, his face covered with someone's jacket. A support beam had given way in the Silver Creek mine. 3 men died that day. Thomas was one of them. The funeral was simple. Sarah had no family left, her parents were long gone, and she and Thomas had never been blessed with children. The mining company sent a representative with condolences and a small payment. It wasn't enough to cover the debts Thomas had accumulated trying to make their claim work. It wasn't enough to see her through winter. It wasn't enough for anything except maybe a ticket east and a new start with nothing to her name. But Sarah had never been one to run from hard times. She'd grown up on a farm in Ohio, learned to work with her hands, to make do with little. When she married Thomas at 19, she'd known he was a dreamer. He'd talked about silver in the mountains, about striking it rich, about the life they'd build together. She'd followed him west because she loved him, because his optimism had been infectious, because staying in Ohio meant a life of predictable sameness that felt like slow death. The Colorado Territory had been beautiful and brutal in equal measure. Their small house in the mining camp of Red Creek was drafty and plain, but Sarah had made it a home. She'd planted a garden in the rocky soil, coaxed vegetables from earth that didn't want to give them. She'd learned to stretch every dollar, to mend clothes until they were more patch than original fabric, to smile when Thomas came home excited about a new vein he'd found, even though she knew most of his claims never panned out. Now he was gone, and the debts remained. The company store wanted payment, the landlord wanted the house back. The other miners' wives brought casseroles and sympathy, but Sarah could see the relief in their eyes, glad it wasn't their husband, glad it wasn't their problem. Within a week, she'd sold everything she owned except what fit in a single carpet bag. It still wasn't enough to clear the debts. The company manager, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles, had looked at her with something between pity and contempt. "You could stay on," he'd suggested. "Work in the company laundry. We'd take the debt out of your wages." Sarah had done the math in her head. At laundry wages, she'd be working off Thomas's debts for 3 years, maybe more. Living in company housing, buying from the company store, sinking deeper into a hole she'd never climb out of. It was a trap dressed up as mercy. "No," she'd said. "I'll find something else." The manager had shrugged. "Suit yourself, but winter's coming, Mrs. Mitchell. Opportunities don't grow on trees out here." He was right about that. Sarah had spent 2 weeks asking at every establishment in Red Creek and the neighboring camps. No one was hiring, or rather, the offers she received weren't the kind she could accept. The saloon owner had looked her up and down with eyes that made her skin crawl. The boarding house keeper had work, sure, but the pay was barely enough for a bed in a shared room. Every door that opened showed her the same truth. A woman alone in mining country had few options, and most of them led nowhere good. That's when she'd heard about Timber Ridge. It was a smaller settlement 20 miles north, closer to the high country. A woman at the general store had mentioned it, while Sarah was counting out her last coins for cornmeal and coffee. "If you're looking for work, you might try up north," the woman had said, her voice low. Timber Ridge has some logging operations. They need cooks for the camps sometimes, and there's trappers up in those mountains. Some of them might need help with the domestic side of things, if you're willing to work hard and don't mind isolation. It wasn't much, but it was something. Sarah had thanked her, bought her meager supplies, and started walking north the next morning. The road was rough, little more than a trail in places. She'd slept under the stars when the weather held, in abandoned prospector shacks when she could find them. She ate sparingly, rationing her food, drinking from cold mountain streams. Her feet blistered in her worn boots. Her shoulders ached from the carpetbag's weight. But she kept moving because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant facing the full weight of her loss. Timber Ridge was smaller than she'd expected. A handful of buildings clustered around a muddy main street, a general store, a saloon, a church that doubled as a schoolhouse, and a few scattered homes. The logging camp was 2 miles out, and the foreman there had laughed when she'd asked about cooking work. "Season's nearly done, ma'am. We'll be shutting down operations in 2 weeks. Most of the men will winter in Denver or head south. No need for a cook when there's no crew to feed." The general store owner, a weathered man named Hutchins, had been more sympathetic, but no more helpful. "Work's scarce here too," he'd admitted. "Most folks are settling in for winter." Sarah had stood in that store, feeling the last of her hope drain away. Spring was months off. She had maybe 2 weeks' worth of food left, no shelter, and winter already creeping down from the peaks. The desperation must have shown on her face because Hutchins had leaned forward, his voice dropping. "There's a man lives up in the high country, Jack Dawson. Keeps to himself mostly, but he's decent folk. Comes down for supplies every few weeks. Traps, hunts, lives off the land. A man like that, living alone, he could use some help. Cooking, mending, keeping house. Might be willing to pay for it, or at least provide room and board through winter." He'd drawn her a rough map on a piece of brown paper. "It's a hard walk, maybe 5 miles up the mountain trail. Can't miss his place, only cabin up that way. But, ma'am, I should tell you, Jack's not the social type. Lost his family some years back. Doesn't take kindly to unexpected visitors. You go up there, you be respectful, state your business plain and honest. He's got no patience for nonsense, but he's fair." Sarah had taken the map, thanked him, and bought a small tin of coffee as a gift to bring. It had taken the last of her money. She'd started up the trail that afternoon, driven by a need to keep moving, to do something before fear could take root and paralyze her. The climb had been steep. Aspen trees blazed gold in the autumn sun, and the air grew thinner as she ascended. Her breath came hard, her legs trembled with exhaustion and lack of food. But the beauty of the country struck her even through her weariness. This was wild land, untamed and magnificent. It showed no mercy, but it also made no false promises. There was an honesty to it that Red Creek, with its desperate dreams and broken men, had lacked. Jack Dawson's cabin sat in a small clearing surrounded by pine and spruce. It was well built, solid logs chinked tight against the wind, a stone chimney rising from one end. Smoke curled from that chimney, and Sarah could smell wood smoke and something cooking meat, probably venison. Behind the cabin, she could see a small barn, a root cellar, and what looked like a smokehouse. This was the home of a man who knew how to survive, who'd carved out a life in a place that killed the unprepared. Sarah stood at the edge of the clearing for a long moment, gathering her courage. The door was closed, but she could see a shadow move past the window. Someone was home. She touched the worn gold band, still on her left hand, Thomas's ring, the one thing she hadn't sold. Then she lifted her chin, crossed the clearing, and knocked on Jack Dawson's door. The man who answered was not what she'd expected. Tall, broad-shouldered, maybe 40 years old, with dark hair starting to grey at the temples. His face was weathered by sun and wind, carved into hard lines, but his eyes were what caught her. Blue-grey like winter sky, sharp with intelligence, but carrying a weight of sadness that Sarah recognized. This was a man who knew loss. This was a man who understood what it meant to keep moving because stopping hurt too much. He looked at her for a long moment, taking in her worn dress, her carpet bag, the exhaustion she couldn't hide. When he spoke, his voice was deep and rough from disuse. "You're a long way from anywhere, ma'am." Sarah straightened her spine. "My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm looking for work. I can cook, clean, mend, tend a garden. I'll work hard for fair wages, or for room and board if that's what you can offer. I need a position through winter, but I'll stay longer if the arrangement suits us both." Jack Dawson studied her in silence. Sarah fought the urge to fill that silence with explanations, with pleading. She'd stated her case. Now she waited. Finally he stepped back from the door. "You'd better come in." The cabin's interior was spare but clean. A large fireplace dominated one wall, a simple table and 2 chairs sat near it, and she could see a ladder leading to a loft space. Everything was orderly, well maintained. This was the home of a man who took care of what was his. Jack gestured to a chair. "Sit. You look about ready to fall down." Sarah sank into the chair, grateful beyond words. Jack moved to the fireplace, ladled stew from a pot into a wooden bowl, and set it in front of her with a piece of hard bread. "Eat," he said. It wasn't an offer, it was a command born of seeing someone in need. Sarah's pride warred with her hunger. Hunger won. She ate slowly, trying to maintain some dignity. But the food was good, and there'd been too many days of too little. When she finished, Jack refilled the bowl without comment. She ate that too. Only when she'd finished did Jack sit across from her, his eyes never leaving her face. "You're running from something," he said. "Not a question." "Widowed 3 weeks ago," Sarah replied, meeting his gaze. "Mining accident. My husband left debts I couldn't pay. No family, no prospects. I'm not running, I'm surviving." Jack nodded slowly. "Fair enough. I'm not hiring." The words hit like a blow, but Sarah kept her face steady. "I see. Thank you for the meal." She started to rise, but Jack held up a hand. "I said, I'm not hiring. Didn't say I couldn't use help." He leaned back in his chair, regarding her with those penetrating eyes. "Winter's coming. I live alone up here, and it's hard country. A woman on her own in these mountains won't last a week. You know that, or you wouldn't be here." "I'm stronger than I look," Sarah said quietly. "Maybe so. But strength only carries you so far when the snow's 6 feet deep and the temperature drops below 0. He paused. "I've got a proposition for you. Not work. Something else." Sarah waited, her heart beginning to pound. "Marry me," Jack said, "before sunset. Reverend Hayes in Timber Ridge will do it. You'd have my name, my protection, a roof over your head. I'd have company through winter, someone to share the work. It's a practical arrangement, nothing more. Separate sleeping quarters. Respect on both sides. Come spring, if you want to leave, I won't stop you." Sarah stared at him, shocked beyond words. Marriage. To a complete stranger, it was insane. It was also possibly the only choice that made sense. "Why?" she managed to ask. "Why would you do this?" Jack's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Because I know what it's like to have no choices left," he said. "Because you came up here alone, which takes courage. Because turning you away means your death, and I've seen enough death." He stood. "You don't have to decide this second. But the sun's dropping. If we're doing this, we need to leave soon to reach Timber Ridge before dark." Sarah looked at the worn gold band on her finger. Thomas was gone. The life she'd known was gone. Everything she'd been was already buried back in Red Creek. This man, this stranger, was offering her survival. Maybe more than survival. A chance. A new beginning built on honesty rather than dreams. She slipped Thomas's ring off her finger and placed it carefully in her pocket. When she looked up at Jack Dawson, her decision was made. "Yes," she said, "I'll marry you." The ride down to Timber Ridge passed in silence. Jack had saddled his horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Red, and offered Sarah a hand up behind him. She'd hesitated only a moment before accepting, settling herself on the horse's broad back, her carpet bag clutched in one hand. When the horse started moving, she'd instinctively reached for something to hold and found herself gripping Jack's coat. He didn't comment on it, just guided the horse down the mountain trail with steady confidence. Sarah's mind raced with what she was about to do. Marriage. The word felt foreign in this context, stripped of everything she'd once associated with it. There would be no courtship, no romance, no gradual building of affection and trust. This was a transaction, pure and simple. But as she sat behind this quiet stranger, feeling the warmth of his back against her chest, breathing in the scent of wood smoke and pine that clung to his clothes, she wondered if perhaps that simplicity was a gift. No illusions, no false promises, just two people choosing survival together. The sun was lowering toward the western peaks when they reached Timber Ridge. The settlement looked different in the golden autumn light, less desperate somehow. Jack guided Red to the small church at the end of the main street and dismounted, then helped Sarah down. His hands on her waist were brief, impersonal, but steady. "Wait here," he said, and disappeared inside the church. Sarah stood in the fading light, her heart pounding. She could still change her mind. She could walk away, find some other solution, take her chances with winter and fate. But even as the thought formed, she knew it was fantasy. There was no other solution. This was the only door that had opened, and she was walking through it. Jack emerged a moment later with a man in his 60s, lean and grey-haired, wearing simple black clothes and a clerical collar. This would be Reverend Hayes. His eyes were kind but sharp, taking in Sarah's appearance with a glance that missed nothing. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, his voice gentle. "I'm Samuel Hayes. Jack tells me you wish to marry this evening." "Yes, Reverend," Sarah replied, keeping her voice steady. Hayes nodded slowly. "It's unusual, to be sure. Jack, might I have a word with the lady in private?" Jack's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "I'll see to the horse." The Reverend gestured Sarah toward the church. "Walk with me if you would." Inside, the church was simple but well-kept, wooden pews, a plain altar, late sunlight streaming through the western windows. Hayes led her to a pew and sat, indicating she should do the same. "I've known Jack Dawson for 5 years, Hayes said without preamble. "He came to this settlement a broken man. Lost his wife and daughter to fever. Did he tell you that?" Sarah nodded. "He's a good man, Mrs. Mitchell. Honest, hard-working, keeps his word. But he's also a man who's been living alone with his grief for a long time. This marriage you're entering, it's not a conventional one, I gather." "No, Reverend. It's an arrangement. For practical reasons." Hayes studied her face. "And you understand what you're agreeing to? A life of isolation in the mountains, with a man you don't know?" "I understand I'm widowed, penniless, and winter's coming," Sarah said quietly. "I understand that Jack Dawson is offering me a chance to survive, when I have no other options. I understand that this isn't about love, and I'm not expecting it to be." "What are you expecting?" The question caught her off guard. Sarah considered it carefully. "Respect," she said finally. "Honesty. A fair partnership. That's more than many conventional marriages offer." Hayes smiled faintly. "You're a practical woman." "That's good. You'll need to be." He paused. "Jack's offer comes from decency, but also from loneliness, whether he'd admit it or not. He's been alone too long. That can change a person, make them set in their ways. You'll need patience. And what will he need from me?" "The same, I expect. You're both carrying grief, both running from pain. Marriage won't heal that only time and grace can. But perhaps you can help each other bear the weight." Hayes stood. "If you're certain this is what you want, I'll perform the ceremony. But Mrs. Mitchell, I want you to know my door is always open. If you ever need help or counsel, or simply need to talk to someone, you come to me. Day or night. Do you understand? Sarah felt unexpected tears prick her eyes at the kindness in his voice. Thank you, Reverend. I understand. They found Jack waiting outside, holding Red's reins, his face unreadable. Hayes beckoned them both inside. Do you have rings? Hayes asked. Jack shook his head. Sarah touched her pocket, feeling the outline of Thomas's ring there, but said nothing. That ring belonged to a different life, a different marriage. It had no place here. No matter, Hayes said. The covenant is what matters, not the symbols. He opened his Bible. Jack Dawson, Sarah Mitchell, please stand before me. They stood side by side in the small church, two strangers about to bind their lives together. The light through the windows was turning amber, the day dying into evening. Sarah's hands trembled slightly. She folded them together to still them. Hayes began to speak, his voice filling the quiet space. Marriage is a sacred bond, ordained by God, not to be entered into lightly. It is a covenant between two souls, a promise to walk through life together, bearing each other's burdens, sharing each other's joys. He looked at them both. The circumstances that bring you here are unusual, but the vows you're about to take are the same vows that have bound couples together for generations. When you speak these words, you're making a promise before God and each other. Consider them carefully. Jack's expression was grave, his eyes fixed on the Reverend. Sarah felt the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders. This was real. This was happening. Jack Dawson, Hayes said, do you take this woman, Sarah Mitchell, to be your lawfully wedded wife? Do you promise to provide for her, protect her, and treat her with respect and kindness, in plenty and in want, in sickness and in health, as long as you both shall live? Jack's voice was quiet but firm. I do. Hayes turned to Sarah. Sarah Mitchell, do you take this man, Jack Dawson, to be your lawfully wedded husband? Do you promise to stand beside him, to share his burdens and his home, to treat him with respect and kindness, in plenty and in want, in sickness and in health, as long as you both shall live? Sarah took a breath. The words felt enormous, binding, but she'd made her choice. I do. Then, by the authority vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. Hayes closed his Bible. Jack, you may kiss your bride, if you wish. Jack turned to Sarah. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. Then he leaned forward and pressed a gentle, brief kiss to her forehead. It was chaste, almost brotherly, but there was something tender in it that made Sarah's breath catch. When he stepped back, his eyes met hers with what might have been a question. She managed a small nod. It was done. She was Sarah Dawson now. Hayes produced a certificate from his desk, filled in their names with careful script, and had them both sign. Jack signed with a steady hand. Sarah's signature wavered only slightly. Hayes signed as witness, then handed the certificate to Jack. I'll register this with the territorial office next time I'm in Denver, Hayes said. Jack, Sarah, may God bless your union and grant you both peace. Thank you, Reverend, Jack said. He drew a small pouch from his pocket and placed it on the desk. The clink of coins was soft but clear. That's too much, Hayes protested. It's fair, Jack said. For your time and your discretion. Hayes accepted it with a nod. I'll pray for you both. They left the church as the sun touched the western peaks. The temperature was already dropping, that sharp mountain cold that came with nightfall. Jack helped Sarah mount Red again, then swung up in front of her. As they started back up the mountain trail, Sarah looked back once at Timber Ridge. The settlement was lighting lamps against the gathering darkness, small glows of warmth in the vastness of the wilderness. Then they were climbing, leaving it all behind. The ride back seemed longer than the ride down. Full darkness fell before they were halfway to the cabin, but Jack guided Red with confidence, the horse knowing the trail even in the dark. Sarah was exhausted, her body aching from the day's events and the emotional toll of what she'd done. She found herself leaning more heavily against Jack's back, drawing warmth from him against the cold. When they finally reached the cabin, Jack dismounted and helped her down. Her legs nearly buckled. She'd been holding tension in her body for hours without realizing it. Jack's hand steadied her elbow. "Go inside," he said. "I'll tend to Red." Sarah took her carpet bag and entered the cabin. It was dark and cold, the fire having died to embers while they were gone. She set down her bag and stood in the darkness, suddenly overwhelmed by the enormity of what had just happened. She was married to a man she'd met only hours ago, in a cabin in the wilderness, miles from anyone or anything familiar. The door opened. Jack entered, struck a match, and lit the oil lamp on the table. Golden light filled the space. He moved to the fireplace and began rebuilding the fire with practiced efficiency, adding kindling to the embers, then larger pieces of wood. Soon flames were crackling, pushing back the cold. He straightened and turned to face her. They stood on opposite sides of the cabin, husband and wife, strangers. "You'll take the bedroom," Jack said, gesturing to a door Sarah hadn't noticed before. "It's small, but there's a good bed, warm quilts. I'll sleep in the loft." "That's not necessary," Sarah began. "I don't want to—" "It's necessary," Jack interrupted, his tone gentle but firm. "We agreed on respect and separate quarters. That room is yours. I won't intrude on your privacy." Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. Jack moved to a cabinet and took out 2 cups and a bottle. He poured amber liquid into both cups and handed one to Sarah. "Whiskey," he said. "Medicinal purposes. It's been a long day." Sarah accepted the cup. She rarely drank spirits, but he was right, it had been a long day. She took a sip and felt the burn all the way down, followed by spreading warmth. Jack raised his cup slightly. "To survival," he said. Sarah met his eyes and raised her cup in return. "To survival." They drank in silence. Then Jack set down his cup and moved toward the door. "I'll bring in more firewood. You should rest. There's bread and cheese in the cupboard if you're hungry. Take what you need." "Jack," Sarah said. He paused, looking back at her. She searched for words. "Thank you. For this. For giving me a chance." Something shifted in his expression, a softening around his eyes. "We're giving each other a chance," he said quietly. "That's what this is. Both of us getting a second try at living." Then he was gone into the night, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts and the crackling fire. She moved to the bedroom door and opened it. The room was indeed small, barely large enough for the bed, a small dresser and a chair. But it was clean, and the bed was made up with thick quilts that looked warm and inviting. A small window looked out toward the mountains, though now there was only darkness beyond the glass. Sarah set her carpet bag on the chair and sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress was good, stuffed with what felt like corn husks and wool. She pulled Thomas's ring from her pocket and looked at it in the lamplight Jack had left burning on the dresser. She'd worn it for 6 years. It had meant everything once: love, promise, hope for the future. Now it was just a circle of gold, a relic of a life that was over. Sarah opened the small drawer in the dresser and placed the ring inside, carefully, respectfully. Then she closed the drawer and began unpacking her few belongings. A change of clothes, a hairbrush, her mother's recipe book, water-stained but precious. A few other small items, all that remained of her former life. Outside, she could hear Jack moving around, the sound of wood being stacked, his boots on the porch. These were the sounds of her new life, this quiet stranger who was now her husband. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or the day after, or the long winter ahead. But for tonight, she had shelter. She had safety. She had survived another day. Sarah changed into her nightgown, climbed under the quilts, and blew out the lamp. In the darkness, she could still see the glow of the main room's fire through the crack under the door. She could hear Jack moving about, settling in for the night. The sounds were oddly comforting, the presence of another human being in this vast wilderness. She closed her eyes and, for the first time in weeks, slept without fear. The first snow came 2 days later, just as Jack had predicted. Sarah woke to a world transformed, everything blanketed in white, the silence deeper and more profound than before. Jack was already up, bundled in his heavy coat, preparing to check on the animals in the barn. "Stay inside today," he said. "Snow's still falling. Easy to lose your way in it if you're not used to mountain weather." But after he left, Sarah found herself restless. The cabin felt smaller somehow with the world closed off by falling snow. She busied herself with baking, with organizing the few books Jack owned, with anything to keep her hands occupied. That's when she noticed the ladder to the loft, and curiosity got the better of her. The loft was Jack's space, his sleeping area, his private domain. She'd never been up there, had respected his privacy just as he respected hers. But now, with him gone and time on her hands, she climbed the ladder to see if there was anything that needed organizing or cleaning. The loft was sparse, a narrow bed with wool blankets, a trunk at its foot, a small shelf with a few personal items. Sarah was about to climb back down when she noticed something tucked into the corner behind the trunk, a small wooden box, hand-carved with delicate flowers. She knew she shouldn't open it, knew it was a violation of Jack's privacy, but her hands moved of their own accord, lifting the lid. Inside was a child's wooden doll, hand-carved, painted with careful detail, a girl doll with dark hair and a blue dress, Emma's doll. It had to be. Sarah's hand trembled as she lifted it from the box. The paint was faded, the wood worn smooth from small hands holding it. On the bottom of the doll's foot, carved in tiny letters, "For Emma, with love from Papa." The grief radiating from this simple toy was overwhelming. Sarah could picture Jack carving it during long winter nights, painting it with meticulous care, presenting it to his daughter. Could picture Emma's joy, her small hands clutching it, her voice calling out, "Papa, look what I can make her do." And now it sat hidden in a box in the loft, a grief too heavy to look at, but too precious to discard. Sarah was carefully placing the doll back in its box when she heard the cabin door open. Jack's voice called out, "Sarah, you up there?" There was no hiding what she'd been doing. Sarah climbed down the ladder, the box in her hands, to find Jack shaking snow from his coat. He froze when he saw what she was holding. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Jack's face had gone pale, his eyes fixed on the box with an expression of such raw pain that Sarah's heart broke for him. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I was just looking to see if the loft needed organizing. I shouldn't have opened it." Jack didn't respond. He stood there, snow melting in his hair, his hands clenched at his sides. Sarah set the box on the table and opened it, lifting out the doll. "She was beautiful," she said softly. "You can see the love in every detail." "Don't," Jack said, his voice rough. "Don't what? Don't acknowledge that you lost something precious? Don't see that you're still carrying grief that's eating you alive?" Sarah held the doll carefully. "Jack, hiding her things away doesn't make the pain less. It just makes it fester. You don't understand." "I understand better than you think." Sarah moved closer to him. "I understand what it's like to lose someone and feel like you can't breathe from the weight of it. I understand guilt and regret and wishing you could go back and change things. But Jack, you can't live the rest of your life hiding from their memory." Jack finally looked at her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "That was Emma's favorite toy. I made it for her 4th birthday. She carried it everywhere. When she was sick, she held it so tight I thought she'd break it. And when she died," his voice cracked, "when she died, I put it in her arms. But at the last moment, before we closed the coffin, I couldn't let it go into the ground with her. So I took it back." "What kind of father does that?" "A human one," Sarah said. "One who needed something to hold on to. Jack, There's no right way to grieve, no rules about what you keep or what you let go. I should have been here, Jack said, the words bursting out as if they'd been dammed up for too long. If I'd been here, I could have ridden for the doctor sooner, could have done something. They died because I wasn't here to protect them. They died because fever doesn't care about fault or blame, Sarah said firmly. You could have been here, and it might have made no difference at all. Or you could have been here and gotten sick yourself, and all three of you would be gone. You can't know. All you can know is that you loved them, and they loved you. Jack sank into a chair, his head in his hands. Sarah set the doll carefully on the table and knelt beside him, her hand on his shoulder. Tell me about her, she said gently. Not just the grief. Tell me about Emma when she was alive. What made her laugh? What did she love to do? Jack was silent for so long Sarah thought he wouldn't answer. Then, slowly, he began to speak. She loved the mornings best, used to wake up before dawn and climb into bed with me and Mary, chattering about what we'd do that day. She was curious about everything, why the sky was blue, where the rabbits went in winter, how the trees knew when to grow leaves. A faint smile touched his lips. She wanted to help with everything, tried to carry firewood that was bigger than she was, insisted on feeding the chickens, even though they scared her a little. She sounds wonderful, Sarah said. She was. Mary used to say Emma had enough energy for 3 children. She never stopped moving, never stopped asking questions. Jack looked at the doll. I made that for her because she wanted a baby to take care of. She'd been asking for a little brother or sister, and Mary couldn't. He stopped, took a breath. Mary had had a difficult birth with Emma. The doctor said there wouldn't be other children. And she loved it like it was real. Sarah picked up the doll again. What was her name? The doll. Rose. Emma named her Rose. That's a beautiful name. Sarah stood and placed the doll on the mantel above the fireplace, where the firelight caught the faded paint and made it glow. She shouldn't be hidden away in a box, Jack. She should be here, where you can see her, where you can remember Emma without it feeling like a wound that never heals. Jack stared at the doll on the mantel. I don't know if I can look at it every day. Maybe you can't, Sarah admitted, but maybe in time it'll hurt less to remember than it does to forget. She returned to kneel beside him. Tell me about Mary. Was she from around here? And Jack did. He told Sarah about meeting Mary in Missouri, about how she'd been a school teacher with a sharp mind and an even sharper wit, about how she'd agreed to marry him and come west, not because she was desperate or had no other options, but because she'd wanted adventure and wasn't afraid of hard work. He told Sarah about their early years together, building this cabin log by log, learning the rhythms of mountain life. She was my partner, Jack said. In everything. We built this life together, and when she died, it felt like half of me died too. I've been living like a ghost these past 5 years, going through the motions, but not really alive. I know that feeling, Sarah said quietly. I felt it too after Thomas died, like I was watching my life from outside myself, not really participating. She met Jack's eyes. But I'm starting to feel alive again. Because of you, because of this place, because I have purpose again. You gave me that, Jack. Maybe I can help give it back to you. Jack reached out and took her hand. His grip was tight, almost desperate. I didn't think I could feel anything again except the grief. But these past weeks with you here, it's different. The cabin doesn't feel empty anymore. I don't feel empty anymore. Good, Sarah said, because you're not empty. You're just wounded. And wounds can heal given time and care. They sat together as the snow continued to fall outside, as the fire crackled and Rose the doll watched over them from the mantel. Something had shifted between them that afternoon. The walls they'd both built around their hearts had developed cracks, and through those cracks light was beginning to seep in. That evening Jack didn't retreat to the loft immediately after supper. Instead, he stayed by the fire with Sarah, and they talked. Really talked, sharing memories of the people they'd lost, the lives they'd lived before. Sarah told him about her parents, her childhood on the Ohio farm, her dreams of seeing the ocean someday. Jack told her about his father, who taught him to hunt and trap, about his mother's quiet strength, about the dreams he and Mary had shared. And slowly, painfully, beautifully, they began to weave their separate pasts into a shared present. The grief didn't disappear, it would always be there, a part of who they were. But it was no longer the only thing defining them. When Sarah finally retired to her room that night, she looked back to see Jack standing by the mantel, one hand resting gently on Emma's doll. His face was peaceful in a way she hadn't seen before. She closed her door and climbed into bed, listening to the wind howl outside and the snow pile against the windows. They were snowed in now, cut off from the world. But inside this cabin, two people were learning to live again, to hope again, and that was its own kind of miracle. The snow continued for 3 days, piling deep around the cabin. Jack and Sarah fell into new rhythms, moving around each other in the confined space with growing ease. He taught her how to read the weather by the way the wind sounded, how to tell when more snow was coming. She taught him that meals could be more than just fuel, that small comforts mattered even in the wilderness. In the long evenings, they talked more than they had since Sarah's arrival. Jack was carving something by the firelight, his hands moving with practiced skill over a piece of pale wood. Sarah watched him work while she knitted, unraveling an old shawl to make yarn for new gloves. "What are you making?" she asked. Jack didn't look up, but she saw the faint color rise in his cheeks. "Nothing much, just keeping my hands busy." But over the next several evenings, she watched the piece of wood transform. It was a comb, she realized, hand-carved, with delicate teeth and a smooth handle. The attention to detail was remarkable, each tooth perfectly spaced, the wood polished to a soft sheen. He was making it for her. Sarah knew it as surely as she knew her own name, but she didn't say anything. Let him have his secret, let him finish it in his own time. Christmas was approaching, though neither of them had mentioned it. Sarah found herself thinking about it more as the days passed. There would be no presents, no celebration. They had the basics for survival, nothing extra for frivolity. But she wanted to mark the day somehow, wanted to acknowledge that something was different this year, that neither of them was alone. She made plans quietly, used some of their precious flour and the last of the dried fruit to attempt a simple cake. Found yarn she could spare to finish the gloves she'd been knitting for Jack. His current pair was worn nearly through at the fingers. It wasn't much, but it was something. Christmas Eve arrived with clear skies and bitter cold. Sarah had spent the day cooking, making their simple meal as special as she could manage. Roasted rabbit with herbs, biscuits, the dried fruitcake she'd been hiding in the root cellar. When Jack came in from his evening chores, he stopped and looked around. Sarah had set the table more carefully than usual, found 2 candles and lit them. It wasn't fancy, but it was festive. "Sarah," he said quietly. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," she interrupted. "It's Christmas Eve. We should acknowledge it, even if it's just the 2 of us." They sat down to eat. The meal was simple but good, and there was something special about sharing it in the candlelight, the darkness pressed close beyond the windows. When they'd finished, Jack stood and climbed to the loft. He came back down, holding something wrapped in cloth. "I made this for you," he said, setting it on the table in front of her. "It's not much, but—" Sarah unwrapped it carefully. The comb lay in her hands, beautiful in its simplicity. She ran her finger along the smooth wood, feeling the careful workmanship, the hours of labor it represented. "Jack," she whispered, "it's beautiful." "Mountain maple," he said. "It's strong, won't break easy." "I thought—" He stopped, then tried again. "I thought you might like something that was just yours, not from your old life. Something new." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. The thoughtfulness of it, the symbolism, a new life, a fresh start. Something made specifically for her by this man, who spoke more through actions than words. "I have something for you too," she said, pulling out the gloves she'd hidden in her apron pocket. They're not as fine as what you made, but they'll keep your hands warm." Jack took the gloves, examined them carefully. "You made these from that old shawl. I wasn't using it. Seemed better to make something practical." He pulled them on, flexed his fingers. They fit perfectly. "Thank you," he said, and the warmth in his voice made Sarah's heart flutter in a way that had nothing to do with gratitude. They cleaned up together, moving around each other in the small space. Sarah was acutely aware of Jack's presence, of how close he stood, of the brush of his hand against hers as they dried dishes. When she reached up to put a plate on the shelf, he was right behind her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. She turned, and suddenly they were face to face, barely a hand's width between them. The air seemed to thicken. Jack's eyes were dark in the firelight, intense in a way she'd never seen them before. "Sarah," he said, and her name on his lips sounded like a question. She didn't step back, didn't break the moment. "Yes, He stopped, swallowed hard. "When I offered you this marriage, I thought I knew what I was getting. A practical arrangement, someone to help through winter. But you've become—" He paused, struggling for words. "You've become more than that." Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "You've become more to me too," she admitted quietly. Jack raised his hand, hesitated, then gently touched her cheek. His palm was rough from work, but his touch was incredibly gentle. Sarah leaned into it without thinking. "I'm not good with words," Jack said. "Never have been. But I want you to know, having you here, it's changed everything. You've brought life back to this cabin, back to me. You saved my life," Sarah said. "Gave me shelter when I had nowhere else to go. Gave me respect when I expected nothing. You've given me a home, Jack." They stood there in the firelight, the moment stretching between them, full of possibility. Jack's thumb brushed across her cheekbone, and Sarah felt herself swaying toward him, drawn by something she couldn't name and didn't want to resist. Then a log shifted in the fireplace, sending up a shower of sparks, and the spell broke. Jack stepped back, his hand falling away from her face. "It's late," he said, his voice rough. "We should—" "Yes," Sarah agreed, though she felt the loss of his warmth keenly. "Good night, Jack." "Good night, Sarah." She retreated to her small room, closed the door, and leaned against it, her hand pressed to the cheek he'd touched. Something had changed tonight. The careful boundaries they'd maintained were beginning to blur, the practical arrangement transforming into something neither of them had planned for. Sarah pulled the comb from her pocket and looked at it in the lamplight. She could see the marks of Jack's knife, the places where he'd smoothed and refined the wood. Hours of work, given freely, made with care, made with she hardly dared think it affection. She used the comb to work through her hair, the teeth gliding smoothly through the strands. It felt like a caress, like Jack's hands in her hair, and the thought made her shiver. In the main room, she could hear Jack banking the fire, his footsteps as he climbed to the loft. She wondered if he was thinking about that moment between them, if his hand still held the phantom warmth of her cheek the way hers held the memory of his touch. Sarah climbed into bed but couldn't sleep. Her mind raced with the evening's events, with the shift in the air between them. She'd married Jack out of necessity, agreed to a practical arrangement with clear boundaries. But her heart hadn't consulted her head. Her heart was developing feelings that were anything but practical. She thought about Jack in the loft above her, separated by wooden boards and promises of respect. She thought about his rare smiles, his quiet competence, the gentleness he showed despite his rough exterior. She thought about his grief and how he was learning to live again, just as she was. And she realized, with a clarity that was both thrilling and terrifying, that she was falling in love with her husband. The snow continued to fall outside, sealing them in together, and somewhere in the darkness, Sarah whispered the truth she couldn't yet say aloud. "I love you, Jack Dawson." The words hung in the air, confession and promise both. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new moments to navigate. But tonight, Sarah held the knowledge close to her heart, a secret gift to match the comb she'd received, precious and fragile and full of hope. The days after Christmas carried a new tension, a charged awareness between Sarah and Jack that made every accidental touch feel significant. They were careful with each other, polite, but there was something simmering beneath the surface that neither quite knew how to address. It was during one of Sarah's cleaning sessions that everything changed. Jack had ridden down to check on their nearest neighbor, Ben Cooper, an elderly man who lived alone 5 miles away. He'd be gone most of the day. Sarah took the opportunity to do a thorough cleaning of the cabin, including organizing Jack's small collection of books. One of them, a worn copy of Walden, had pages loose from the binding. Sarah opened it to see if she could repair it, and a folded paper fell out onto the floor. She picked it up, intending to tuck it back in, when she saw the words printed across the top, "Wanted." Her hands went cold. She unfolded the paper fully and stared at the image looking back at her. It was Jack, or a younger version of him. The name beneath read Jackson Dawson, and the charge was murder. The reward was $500. The poster was 7 years old, yellowed and creased from being folded, but still perfectly legible. Sarah sank into the chair, her mind racing. Murder. Jack was wanted for murder. The man she'd married, the man she'd been living with, the man she was falling in love with, he was a fugitive. Her first instinct was fear. What if he was dangerous? What if the wanted poster was justified? But even as the thoughts formed, she pushed them away. She'd lived with Jack for weeks now. She'd seen his gentleness, his grief, his fundamental decency. Whatever had happened, she couldn't believe he was a cold-blooded killer. But what if someone found out? What if a lawman came looking? Their marriage could be invalidated. She could be left homeless again, or worse, accused of harboring a criminal. Sarah was still holding the poster, her hands shaking, when she heard the cabin door open. Jack stepped inside, stopping short when he saw her face. His eyes dropped to the poster in her hands, and all the color drained from his face. "Sarah," he started. "Is this real?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Are you wanted for murder?" Jack closed the door behind him, moved slowly into the cabin. He didn't try to take the poster from her, didn't try to make excuses. He just stood there, looking at her with resignation in his eyes. "Yes," he said quietly, "it's real. I've been running from it for 7 years. Sarah's heart was pounding. "Did you do it? Did you kill someone?" "No." The word was firm, absolute. "But I witnessed a murder, and the man who committed it made sure I took the blame." "Tell me," Sarah said. "Tell me everything." Jack moved to the other chair, sat down heavily. For a long moment he stared into the fire, gathering his thoughts. Then he began to speak. 7 years ago I was living in Missouri. Mary and Emma were still alive. We had a small farm, nothing fancy, but it was ours. Our neighbor was a man named Henry Fletcher, a good farmer, honest man. The land next to his belonged to a wealthy family, the Thorntons. Richard Thornton, the son, wanted Fletcher's land to expand his holdings, offered to buy it, but Fletcher refused. It had been in his family for generations. Jack paused, his jaw tight. One night, I was riding home late from town, took a shortcut through the woods near Fletcher's property. I heard voices, angry voices. I should have kept riding, but something made me stop. I tied up my horse and moved closer. Sarah waited, barely breathing. Richard Thornton was there with Fletcher. They were arguing. Thornton was drunk, belligerent. He kept saying Fletcher had to sell, that he'd make his life hell if he didn't. Fletcher told him to leave. Thornton pulled a gun. Jack's voice went flat, distant. He shot Fletcher. Just like that, shot him dead over a piece of land. "You saw it happen," Sarah whispered. "I saw it all, and Thornton saw me. I was standing there in the shadows, and he looked right at me. I should have run, but I was frozen. Thornton's father showed up, must have heard the shot. And Richard, quick as anything, He told his father that I'd killed Fletcher, that he'd tried to stop me. But you were a witness. Witnesses don't mean much when the other side has money and influence. Jack said bitterly. Old man Thornton had half the county in his pocket, the sheriff, the judge, everyone who mattered. They arrested me that night. I spent 3 days in jail before I realized I wasn't going to get a fair trial. I was going to hang for a murder I didn't commit. So you ran, Sarah said. I ran, broke out of that jail and rode hard for 2 days straight. Changed my name slightly, went west, kept moving until I found this place. He looked at her finally. By the time they died, I'd been here 3 years and thought maybe I'd finally outrun my past. Sarah's mind was reeling. And the poster? There were posters everywhere at first. $500 is a lot of money. But it's been 7 years. Most people have forgotten. The poster you found, I kept it as a reminder, to stay hidden, to never get comfortable. He stood, began to pace. I should have told you before we married. Should have given you all the facts. But I was selfish. I needed... He stopped, looked at her. I needed not to be alone anymore, and you needed shelter. I told myself it was a fair trade, that you'd never need to know. But now, I do know, Sarah said quietly. Yes. And I understand if you want to leave. I can take you to Timber Ridge, dissolve the marriage. Reverend Hayes would help you get somewhere safe. I won't trap you in this, Sarah. Won't make you an accomplice to my past. Sarah looked at the poster again, at Jack's younger face, staring back at her. Then she looked at the man standing before her, the man who'd given her shelter, who'd treated her with respect, who'd shared his grief and his slowly healing heart. Do you swear you didn't kill that man? She asked. I swear it on Emma's grave, Jack said, his voice breaking slightly. I swear it on everything I hold sacred. I witnessed a murder, but I didn't commit one. Sarah believed him. Maybe she was a fool to believe him, but she did. She'd seen the core of this man, had lived with him, watched him grieve and heal. He was capable of many things, but cold-blooded murder wasn't one of them. I'm not leaving, she said. Jack stared at her. Sarah, you don't understand the risk. I understand perfectly, she interrupted. I understand that you've been living with this fear for 7 years. I understand that you're innocent of the crime you're accused of. And I understand that if I leave now, I'm abandoning you when you need someone to believe in you. She stood, walked to the fireplace, and held the poster over the flames. We're married, Jack, for better or worse. This is the worse, and I'm staying. She dropped the poster into the fire. They both watched it curl and blacken, the image of Jack's younger face disappearing into ash. You could be arrested for harboring me, Jack said hoarsely. If anyone finds out, then we make sure no one finds out. Sarah turned to face him. We're isolated up here. You've been safe for 5 years in this place. We can continue to be safe, together. Jack crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. The embrace was fierce, desperate, grateful. Sarah held him just as tightly, feeling his heart pounding against hers. Why? He whispered into her hair. Why would you risk this for me? Sarah pulled back enough to look into his eyes. Because I believe you. Because you've given me everything when you had no reason to. Because... She hesitated, then decided to just say it. Because I love you, Jack. I didn't plan to. I didn't expect to. But I do. Jack's eyes widened, his hands tightening on her arms. Sarah, you don't have to say it back, she said quickly. I know this marriage started as an arrangement. I know we said no expectations. But I can't help how I feel, and I needed you to know. I'm staying because I choose to, because I want to, because my place is here with you. Jack cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized she was crying. I love you too, he said, his voice rough with emotion. God help me, I love you. I've been fighting it, telling myself I didn't deserve to love again, didn't deserve happiness after losing Mary and Emma. But you walked into my life and made me want to live again, made me believe I could have a future instead of just a past. Then he was kissing her, and Sarah was kissing him back, and 7 years of loneliness and grief and fear were dissolving in the warmth of finally being honest, finally being open, finally being together in the truest sense. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jack rested his forehead against hers. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Once we cross this line, there's no going back. You'll be tied to a fugitive. Your life could be in danger." "I'm sure," Sarah said firmly. "We face this together, whatever comes." That night, Sarah moved her belongings from the small bedroom to the loft. There was no pretense anymore, no careful boundaries. They were husband and wife in truth now, bound not just by legal documents but by love and choice and shared risk. As they lay together in the narrow bed, Jack's arms around her, Sarah thought about the strange path that had led her here. From widow to wife, from desperate to hopeful, from stranger to beloved. The future was uncertain. The threat of Jack's past still loomed over them. But for now, in this moment, they had each other. And that would have to be enough. Winter deepened, and with it came a peace Sarah had never known. Despite the shadow of Jack's past hanging over them, these were the happiest weeks of her life. They'd stopped pretending, stopped holding back. The cabin that had once felt like a refuge now felt like a true home, filled with small intimacies and shared routines. But peace in the wilderness is always temporary. The thaw came early that year, in late February. The snow began to recede, revealing the muddy earth beneath. Trails that had been impassable became navigable again, and with the thaw came visitors. Ben Cooper arrived on a cold, bright morning in early March. Jack and Sarah were working together to repair winter damage to the barn when they heard the sound of a horse approaching. Jack tensed immediately, his hand going instinctively to the rifle he kept nearby. But it was just Ben, his weathered face grave as he dismounted. "Jack, Sarah, we need to talk." They brought him inside, and Sarah poured coffee while Jack waited with visible tension. Ben got straight to the point. "There's a federal marshal passed through Timber Ridge 2 days ago, name's Clayton Wade. He's asking questions about men who might have come west from Missouri 7 or 8 years back, showing around old wanted posters." Sarah's blood went cold. She looked at Jack, saw his face had gone pale but calm. He'd been expecting this for 7 years. In a way, it must have been almost a relief to have the waiting over. "Did he have my poster?" Jack asked quietly. Ben nodded. "He did. But Jack, there's more you need to know." The old man paused, took a sip of coffee. "I'm a retired federal marshal myself, been out of the service for 10 years now, came out here for the quiet. But I recognized you the first time you came into Timber Ridge, took one look at you and knew you matched that old wanted poster from Missouri." Sarah felt Jack go rigid beside her. "Why didn't you turn me in?" he asked, his voice flat. "Because I did something marshals aren't supposed to do. I investigated on my own time." Ben set down his cup, sent some letters back east, called in favors from men I used to work with. Got the full story on the Henry Fletcher murder. And Jack, I know you didn't kill that man. I know Richard Thornton did." The relief that flooded through Sarah was so intense she felt dizzy. But Jack remained tense. Knowing and proving are different things. "They are," Ben agreed. "And that's the problem. Thornton's a state senator now, got more money and influence than he did 7 years ago. The sheriff who arrested you is dead, and most of the other witnesses to the investigation are gone or bought off. Your word against his won't mean much in a courtroom." "So what do I do?" Jack asked. "Wait for this Marshal Wade to come up here and arrest me?" "Wade's thorough," Ben said. "And he's honest, which is rare in a lawman these days. He won't arrest a man without being sure of his guilt, but he's also duty-bound. Once he confirms you're Jackson Dawson, he'll have to bring you in." The law doesn't care about innocence until you're in front of a judge. Sarah found her voice. There has to be something we can do. Some way to prove Jack's innocence. Ben looked at her, his expression softening. There might be. I did some more digging after Wade showed up. Turns out Richard Thornton had a business partner back then, man named William Fletcher, Henry Fletcher's cousin. He was there that night too, or came right after. He's been living with the guilt of his silence for 7 years, drinking himself to death. Last I heard, he was still in street. Louis, barely holding on. You think he'd testify? Jack asked. I think he might, if he was approached right, if someone could appeal to whatever conscience he's got left. Ben leaned forward. But Jack, it's risky. You'd have to go back to Missouri, get his statement, bring it to a federal court, and there's no guarantee it would work. Thornton's lawyers could tear him apart on the stand. But it's a chance, Sarah said. It's more than we had yesterday. Jack was shaking his head. It's too dangerous. If I go back to Missouri and get recognized, I'll be arrested on sight. And Sarah, he looked at her, I won't risk you. I won't have you implicated in this. You don't get to make that choice for me, Sarah said firmly. We're in this together, Jack. You said that yourself. She's right, Ben said. And Jack, you won't be alone. I may be retired, but I've still got my badge, still got authority if I need it. I can go with you, help smooth the way. Between the 3 of us, we might just pull this off. 3 of us? Sarah asked. You don't think I'm letting you 2 go into the lion's den without me, do you? Ben smiled faintly. Besides, if we're going to convince William Fletcher to testify, having a woman there might help. Men are less guarded around women, more likely to let their conscience speak. Jack stood, began to pace. Sarah could see the war going on inside him, the desire to clear his name, fighting against his instinct to protect her, to keep her safe from danger. There's one more thing you should know, Ben said quietly. Marshal Wade told me he'll be coming back through Timber Ridge in 3 weeks. He's working his way through the territory, checking on every lead. If he doesn't find you before then, he'll start expanding his search. This cabin is isolated, but it's not secret. Eventually, he'll make his way up here. 3 weeks, Jack said. That's not much time. It's enough, Ben said. If we leave within the week, we can make Street Louis, find Fletcher, get his statement, and be back before Wade returns. It's tight, but possible. Sarah stood and moved to Jack's side. We have to try, she said softly. Jack, you've been running for 7 years, living in fear, hiding who you are. This is a chance to be free, really free, to live without looking over your shoulder. Jack looked at her, his eyes full of fear and love and desperate hope. If something happens to you because of me— It won't, Sarah interrupted. We'll be careful, we'll be smart, and we'll have Ben with us. She took his hand. I didn't come this far, didn't choose this life with you, to let fear win now. We fight for our future, Jack. Together. Jack pulled her close, held her tight. Over her shoulder, he met Ben's eyes. If we do this, we do it right. No half measures. We get the testimony, we get it notarized, we bring it to a federal judge before Wade can arrest me. Agreed, Ben said. I've got contacts in Street Louis. A lawyer I trust, a judge who's not bought by Thornton money. We bring Fletcher's statement to them. They can issue a stay on the arrest warrant while the case is reviewed. The plan began to take shape over the next several hours. They'd leave in 3 days, giving them time to prepare the cabin for their absence and pack what they'd need for the journey. Ben knew the route, knew where they could stay safely along the way. He'd send word ahead to his contacts, prepare the ground. Sarah listened to the men plan, her mind already working through logistics. They'd need supplies, money, warm clothes for the still cold nights. She'd need to prepare food that would travel, organize their affairs in case they didn't return quickly. But beneath the practical concerns was a deeper current of feeling. They were fighting back. After 7 years of hiding, Jack was finally going to confront his past. and she would be beside him every step of the way. That night, after Ben had left with promises to return in 3 days, Sarah and Jack sat by the fire. The cabin felt different now, charged with the energy of impending action. "Are you scared?" Sarah asked quietly. "Terrified," Jack admitted. "Not for myself, for you. If this goes wrong, we face it together," Sarah said. "But Jack, think about what happens if it goes right. We could have a real life, no more hiding, no more fear. We could go into town without you looking over your shoulder. We could have a future." Jack pulled her close, his chin resting on her head. "I never let myself imagine a future, not after Mary and Emma died. The past 7 years, I've just been surviving, day to day. But you changed that. You made me want more than survival." "Then let's fight for it," Sarah said. "Let's fight for the life we want instead of accepting the life we're given." They sat in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying the last of winter's bite. But spring was coming. Change was coming, and with it, the chance for redemption or ruin. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Sarah preserved food, packed their belongings, organized the cabin so it could withstand their absence. Jack saw to the animals, arranged for a local boy to check on them while they were gone, made sure all the equipment was in good repair. And through it all, they stole moments together, long looks across the cabin, touches that lingered a bit longer than necessary, quiet conversations in the dark about what they hoped for, what they feared. On the morning they were set to leave, Sarah stood in the cabin doorway and looked back at the space that had become her home. Emma's doll sat on the mantel. The hand-carved comb rested on the dresser. The simple bed where she and Jack had finally become truly husband and wife. This cabin had saved her life, had given her shelter when she had nothing, had become the place where she'd learned to live again, to love again. She sent up a silent prayer that she'd see it again, that they'd return victorious, free to build the life they'd only just begun. Jack appeared beside her, taking her hand. "Ready?" he asked. Sarah squeezed his hand. "Ready." Ben was waiting with 3 horses and supplies for the journey. They mounted up, and Sarah took one last look at the cabin before they started down the mountain trail. The journey to Missouri and to Jack's reckoning with his past had begun. Ben sent word to the lawyer, and within an hour they were all gathered in a small office near the courthouse. William Fletcher sat at a table, his hands still shaking but his voice growing steadier as he began to tell his story. The lawyer, a careful man named Morrison, took down every word. Fletcher described the night of the murder in painful detail, how he'd arrived at Henry's property to find Richard Thornton standing over his cousin's body. How Thornton had seen him and immediately spun a story about catching a man, Jack Dawson, in the act of murder. How Thornton had threatened Fletcher's family if he spoke the truth. He said his father owned the sheriff, owned the judge, Fletcher said, his voice shaking, said if I contradicted his story, I'd hang alongside Dawson. I was a coward, I believed him, and I let an innocent man take the blame. The statement was notarized, signed, witnessed. Morrison assured them it would hold up in court. But as they were finishing, there was a commotion outside the office. Raised voices, the sound of boots on stairs. The door burst open. Marshal Clayton Wade stood there, his hand on his gun, 3 deputies behind him. His eyes went straight to Jack. "Jackson Dawson," Wade said. "I'm placing you under arrest for the murder of Henry Fletcher." Sarah's heart stopped. How had he found them? They'd been so careful. Ben stepped forward, his retired marshal's badge in hand. "Clayton, wait. We have new evidence." "I don't care about evidence," Wade interrupted. "I have a warrant. My job is to bring him in." His eyes were hard but not unkind. "Step aside, Ben." "Marshal Wade," Morrison said quickly, holding up the statement. "This is a sworn testimony from an eyewitness to the murder. William Fletcher has confessed that Richard Thornton killed Henry Fletcher and that Mr. Dawson was wrongly accused. Wade's eyes flickered to Fletcher, who sat pale and trembling at the table. "That true?" he asked. "Every word," Fletcher whispered. "I'm sorry it took me 7 years to find the courage to say it." Wade's jaw tightened. He looked at the statement, at Fletcher, at Jack. Sarah could see him wrestling with duty and justice. Before he could speak, more footsteps pounded up the stairs. A well-dressed man in his 40s appeared in the doorway, flanked by 2 rough-looking men. Sarah recognized him from Jack's description, Richard Thornton. "Marshal Wade," Thornton said smoothly. "I heard you'd located the fugitive. Well done. My father will be pleased to see justice served at last." "Mr. Thornton," Wade said carefully, "there's been a new development." "I don't care about developments," Thornton interrupted. He caught sight of Fletcher, and his face hardened. "William, I'm surprised to see you here. I thought you'd learn to keep your mouth shut." "I'm done being quiet," Fletcher said, standing on shaky legs. "I'm done letting you get away with murder." Thornton's pleasant facade cracked. "You're drunk. Whatever you think you saw that night, you're mistaken. Your testimony won't hold up." "It'll hold up fine," Morrison interjected. "It's notarized and witnessed. And it directly contradicts the account you gave 7 years ago." "My account was the truth," Thornton said coldly. He turned to Wade. "Marshal, I insist you arrest this man. He's a fugitive and a murderer. Whatever lies these people have concocted—" "They're not lies," Wade said quietly. He'd been reading the statement while Thornton talked. "Mr. Thornton, this testimony places you at the scene of the murder. It contradicts your sworn statement from 7 years ago. I'm going to need you to come in for questioning." Thornton's face went red. "You can't be serious. I'm a state senator." "You have no authority." "I have federal authority," Wade said, "and this statement gives me probable cause. You can come willingly, or I can arrest you. Your choice." Thornton's hand moved toward his coat. One of his men reached for a weapon. Everything happened at once. Wade drew his gun with the speed of a man who'd survived years on the frontier. "Don't," he said, his voice like iron. Ben moved to protect Sarah, his own weapon appearing in his hand. Jack stepped in front of both of them, shielding Sarah with his body. For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Then Thornton slowly removed his hand from his coat, empty. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "My lawyers will tear that statement apart. You'll regret this, all of you." "Maybe," Wade said, "but you're still coming with me." He gestured to his deputies. "Take Mr. Thornton into custody. Hold him for questioning regarding the murder of Henry Fletcher." As the deputies moved forward, Thornton looked at Jack with pure hatred. "You should have stayed hidden," he said. "Now you've sealed all your fates." But there was fear in his eyes too. The fear of a guilty man watching his carefully constructed lies begin to crumble. Wade turned to Jack. "Mr. Dawson, I'm still going to need you to come to the courthouse, but not under arrest as a witness. We'll need your testimony to complete the investigation." "And after?" Sarah asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Wade looked at her, then at Jack, then at the statement in his hand. "If this all checks out, and I believe it will, then Mr. Dawson will be a free man. The warrant will be vacated." Sarah felt her knees go weak with relief. Jack's arm came around her, holding her steady. "Thank you," Jack said to Wade, "for listening, for caring about the truth." Wade nodded. "It's what I swore to do." He looked at Fletcher. "Mr. Fletcher, you did the right thing. Took you a while, but you got there." Fletcher was crying openly now, his face in his hands. "I'm so sorry," he kept saying. "I'm so sorry." The truth was out. After 7 years of running, of hiding, of living in fear, the truth was finally free. 6 months later, Sarah stood on the porch of the cabin, watching the sunset paint the Colorado mountains in shades of gold and amber. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and the promise of the first snow. It felt like coming full circle. She'd arrived here a year ago, desperate and afraid. Now she stood here free, loved, and at peace. The legal proceedings had taken 3 months. Jack had testified before a federal judge, his account corroborated by William Fletcher's statement and Ben's investigation. Richard Thornton had tried to fight it, had brought in expensive lawyers and called in political favors, but the truth was undeniable, and the evidence was solid. Thornton had been convicted of murder and was now serving a life sentence. The charges against Jack had been formally dismissed, his name cleared, the wanted posters had been destroyed. After 7 years of living as a fugitive, Jack Dawson was finally, truly free. They'd stayed in Street Louis through the trial, Ben at their side every step of the way. Marshal Wade had become an unexpected ally, his respect for justice stronger than his adherence to corrupt systems. He'd testified on Jack's behalf, and his word had carried weight. When it was all over, when the judge had declared Jack innocent and dismissed all charges, Sarah had watched her husband's face transform. The weight he'd carried for so long, the fear, the guilt, the constant vigilance had lifted. He'd wept openly in the courtroom, and Sarah had held him, her own tears mixing with his. They'd returned to Colorado in late spring, traveling openly this time, no longer hiding. Jack had even stopped in Timber Ridge to thank Reverend Hayes and to introduce Sarah properly, not as a desperate widow or a fugitive's wife, but as simply Sarah Dawson, Jack's beloved partner. The Reverend had been delighted by their transformation. "You both look like different people," he'd said with a warm smile, "like you finally stopped running and started living." And he was right. Sarah could see it in Jack's face, in the way he moved through the world now. The shadows in his eyes had lifted. His rare smiles came more frequently. He talked about the future, about plans for expanding the cabin, about maybe taking on a few head of cattle, about all the tomorrows they could now plan for without fear. They'd chosen to marry again, properly this time. Not because they had to, not out of desperation or necessity, but because they wanted to stand before God and their community and declare their love freely. The ceremony had been in the same small church, with Reverend Hayes officiating and half of Timber Ridge in attendance. Ben had stood as Jack's witness, beaming with pride. Sarah had worn a simple blue dress, and Jack had worn his best clothes, but what mattered wasn't what they wore. What mattered was the look in Jack's eyes when he said, "I do this time, no hesitation, no shadows, just pure joy and love." Now, as autumn settled over the mountains again, Sarah reflected on the year that had passed. So much had changed, so much had been healed. The sound of footsteps behind her made her turn. Jack emerged from the cabin, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He'd taken to this evening ritual coffee on the porch, watching the sunset together, talking about the day, or sitting in comfortable silence. "Cold out here," he said, handing her a cup. "Sure you don't want to go inside?" "Not yet," Sarah said. "The sunset's too beautiful." Jack settled beside her, his arm coming around her shoulders. They stood together in the fading light, looking out over the land they'd come to love. "Ben sent a letter," Jack said. "Arrived this morning. He's thinking of moving out here permanently. Says Street Louis doesn't feel like home anymore." "He'd be welcome," Sarah said. "It would be good to have him closer." "He's become like family," Jack agreed. "Don't know what we would have done without him." Sarah thought about the strange paths that had brought them all together. Her desperate journey up the mountain, Jack's years of hiding, Ben's quiet investigation. All of it had led to this moment, to this peace. "Jack," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something." He looked at her, concern flickering in his eyes. "What is it?" Sarah took his hand and placed it on her belly. "I'm pregnant. About 3 months along, the doctor in Timber Ridge says." Jack's eyes went wide. For a moment he couldn't speak. Then a smile broke across his face, pure, unguarded joy. "Sarah," he breathed, Truly, truly, she confirmed. We're going to have a baby. Come spring. Jack pulled her close, his face pressed against her hair. She could feel him trembling, could hear the catch in his breathing. When he pulled back, there were tears in his eyes. I never thought, he stopped, swallowed hard. After losing Emma, I never thought I'd be a father again. Never thought I deserved another chance. You deserve every happiness, Sarah said firmly. We both do. We've been through enough darkness. It's time for light. Jack cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears she didn't realize she was crying. I love you, he said, more than I knew it was possible to love someone. You saved my life, Sarah, not just from the law, but from myself, from the grief and fear I'd been drowning in. We saved each other, Sarah corrected. I was just as lost as you were, just as desperate. We found each other when we both needed saving. They kissed as the sun sank below the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant colors. When they finally broke apart, Jack rested his forehead against hers. What should we name her? He asked. If it's a girl. Rose, Sarah said without hesitation, after Emma's doll. So a part of her lives on. Jack's smile was bittersweet, but no longer weighted with unbearable grief. Rose, he repeated. I like that. And if it's a boy? Henry, Sarah suggested. After the man whose death brought us the truth. Henry or Rose Dawson, Jack said, trying out the names. Either way, they'll be loved, they'll be wanted, they'll have a home where they're safe. Inside the cabin, Emma's doll still sat on the mantel. The hand-carved comb rested on the dresser. Thomas's pocket watch and ring lay side by side in the drawer, memories of a past that had shaped them but no longer defined them. This cabin had been built by grief and necessity. And now it would become a home for new life, new hope, new possibilities. Sarah looked out at the mountains one more time, at the vast wilderness that had terrified her a year ago and now felt like sanctuary. She thought about the desperate widow who'd climbed this mountain begging for work, about the lonely man who'd offered marriage instead. They'd both been running from their pasts, both broken by loss, both convinced they'd never be whole again. But they'd found each other in the wilderness, had chosen to build something together from the ruins of their separate sorrows. Come inside, Jack said gently. I'll make a supper. Sarah smiled. I'll help. They walked into the cabin together, closing the door on the gathering darkness. Inside, the fire was warm, the lamp was lit, and the future stretched ahead of them, uncertain perhaps, but no longer frightening. They'd survived the worst, they'd fought for the truth, they'd chosen love when everything else had been taken away. And now, at last, they were free to simply live, free to be happy, free to be home.